ecce agnostai qui tollit peccatum mundi. Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, changed the world forever. The effects of this can be seen even in science, technology, history, art, and culture. In this podcast, we explore these effects and learn what it means for us today to follow the Lamb. I'm Joshua Göcking, and you're listening to the Follow the Lamb podcast. Episode 9: The Transformation from Tragedy to Comedy. So welcome back to the Follow the Lamb podcast. So as you might have noticed by now, the behavior is always like this, that I will first write the articles on my Substack, followthelamb.substack.com. There you can read them in real time, so as they coming out, you can directly read them. I will immediately publish them as soon as I have finished them. So if you want to be up to date always, I recommend you to read them there. Otherwise, I will, as soon as I'm able to record them, I will record the podcast episodes. Most of the times it will be 4 episodes that I will record all together at once, and then I will publish them with a preview and then the episodes individually. So if you would like to listen to them, then you need to be a little bit more patient. But if you don't mind reading, then I really recommend you to read the articles on my Substack. So now, without further ado, we want to dive into the new episodes. So in this first episode, it's about the transformation from tragedy to comedy. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Revelation 21 verse 4. The most important genres of drama are tragedies and comedies. These forms already existed in the theater of ancient Greece. While comedies are characterized by their cheerful mood and happy endings, tragedies depict the inevitable failure of a protagonist who usually meets his death. Another element of a tragedy is its hopelessness. The ending is predetermined from the outset, and every attempt by the protagonists to escape it fails. This is clearly illustrated in the tragedy of Oedipus Rex, from Sophocles, from ancient Greece. Oedipus' parents are prophesied that their son will one day kill his father and marry his mother. To prevent this, they hire a shepherd to abandon him in the mountains to his fate. The shepherd takes pity on him and saves the child. When Oedipus is also prophesied that he will kill his father and marry his mother, he flees from his adoptive parents, whom he considers to be his biological parents, to prevent this from happening. During his flight, he gets into a fight with a man and kills him. This man later turns out to be his biological father. He arrives in Thebes, solves the riddle of the Sphinx, a monster that terrorized the city, and defeats it. So the riddle of the Sphinx is rather well known. It's known from this story of King Oedipus, or Oedipus Rex, who solves the riddle of the Sphinx. And just as a side note, this riddle is the following. I'm not sure if it's phrased that way in the works, probably not, but it basically comes down to this question: what walks on 4 feet in the morning, on 2 in the afternoon, and on 3 in the evening? And the answer to this riddle is man. So man is in its beginning stages as a child, as a baby. He's not able to walk yet, but he's crawling. So he's crawling on all 4s, so 4 feet. And in the afternoon, so when he grew up, he gets to walk on 2 feet. And in the evening, he's an old man who needs a walking cane to walk, and therefore is basically walking on 3 legs. So this is the riddle and its solution, and Oedipus solves this riddle. And as a thank you, basically, for freeing them from this monster, the people of Thebes pronounce them their king, because their king recently passed away. And he also gets to marry their queen, which is, as it turns out, his biological mother. So the efforts of Oedipus and his parents to prevent the prophecy from coming true by any means necessary ultimately led to its fulfillment. This is a prime example of the hopelessness faced by protagonists in tragedies, where their decisions have no influence on the tragic outcome of the plot. So just if you imagine, if the parents of Oedipus would not have abandoned him and let this shepherd bring him to the mountains to leave them to their fate, then he would not have come to this different family where he thought them to be his biological parents, and then he would not this would not have come to pass this way. And if he would not have try to prevent his prophecy by running away from the parents that he believed to be his biological parents, he would not have come into the situation where he basically fulfilled the prophecy. So by basically trying to avoid the prophecy, they fulfilled it. And this is a basic tragic plot, or also the outcome of a basic tragic plot. And you might now think that since this is kind of predictable, that tragedies make that this predictability makes these tragedies less appealing or less interesting to audience than other genres. However, the opposite is true. Most of the best-known plays of antiquity are tragedies, and Shakespeare's best-known works such as Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and Romeo and Juliet are also all tragedies. His comedies, such as A Midsummer's Night Dream and Much Ado About Nothing, are not as well known as those tragedies. So why is that? One possible explanation is that the reason for this is that comedies are also more predictable because their happy ending is also already baked in the cake at the beginning. You already know that there will be a happy ending, and no matter what happens, no matter how tragic it will get in between, you will know that the ending will be happy. More importantly, however, the reasons for this seem to lie in the fact that people usually can identify better with the plot of the tragedy. We have learned that art always reflects the world as it is. In this respect, comedies, like tragedies, reflect our world as it is. The fact that tragedies have a greater impact suggests that they reflect the state of the world more accurately. Comedies usually thrive on an exaggerated portrayal of characters and their weaknesses, which further reinforces this point. So comedies describe also the world as it is, but since they tend to exaggerate it in an extreme way, this makes it more or less realistic than, for example, tragedies are, and maybe this is the reason why tragedies have a greater impact on us than comedies. This does not mean that tragedies are always better than comedies, nor that they are more popular. Most of the time, comedies are preferred by audiences because of their cheerful nature. However, the influence that tragedies have on us seems to be greater because of their greater realism. So this brings us to the tragic state of the world. The greater realism that tragedies seem to have is evident in the fact that the entire state of the world is understood as tragic. We often try to classify events in world history as good or bad. We also try to squeeze individual empires that appeared in world history into such a mold. On closer inspection, however, it becomes clear that it is not that simple. The truth is more complex, and developments that we consider negative today reveal positive features or even a necessity when viewed more closely, especially in a historical context. For example, the era of colonialism is largely viewed negatively today. It is true that the colonialists caused the tragic deaths of many indigenous peoples. However, far more than conscious acts, for example through the conquests, these can be attributed to unconscious effects such as pathogens to which the indigenous people had not yet developed an immune response. The conquest of the indigenous people's land is viewed critically today. This usually creates the impression that the indigenous people previously lived in permanent peace on their relative lands. However, this is not accurate. Most indigenous peoples were divided into tribes that fought each other and took land away from each other. Gestures of acknowledgement of land ownership towards indigenous peoples are difficult because it is usually hard to determine which of the tribes that owned this land at a certain time should receive this acknowledgement. It is believed that the Aztecs originally came from northern Mexico or even the south of what is now the United States, and that they migrated south from there and oppressed the tribes living there. When Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztecs, he did so not only with the help of his Spanish compatriots, but also with the help of the tribes that had been oppressed by the Aztecs. This already shows the difficulty of such black and white pictures. Another example that shows that colonialism must be viewed in a more nuanced way is evident when one realizes that human sacrifice was a common practice among Aztecs and many other colonized peoples. This practice was ended by the European colonialists. Criticism of colonialism today is based on a contemporary perspective that overlooks the fact that many things we take for granted today, such as the widespread absence of human sacrifice across cultures, were only achieved through colonialism. This does not mean that colonialism was something entirely positive. It was often interspersed with racist views of the oppressed tribes and a sense of superiority. It would also be wrong to assume that the colonialists acted solely out of good intentions and did not exploit their such subjects. Joseph Conrad describes the cruelty and madness with which colonialism was carried out in his work Heart of Darkness. To properly contextualize history, it is therefore not enough to classify individual events as good or bad. Rather, it is necessary to recognize that every positive development also has negative consequences, but is nevertheless necessary if the positive outweighs the negative. This is still the case today, and an inability to recognize the tragic nature of the world often leads to symbolic action that at best do not improve the situation and at worst even worsen it. This is no different in the history of Christianity or the history of the Church. Many Protestants are convinced that the separation of church and state is an important asset. Emperor Constantine's declaration of Christianity as the state religion of Rome is considered a great mistake. However, as described above, this takes something for granted that was only achieved through the church as the state religion. Before Constantine became emperor of Rome, it was a tetrarchy. That is, it was divided among 4 rulers. Emperor Diocletian had made this adjustment in order to better govern the vast empire. Just like Diocletian, the rulers carried out cruel persecutions of Christians. Only Constantine showed himself to be extremely tolerant towards Christians. According to legend, in his struggle for the sole rule over the Roman Empire, he saw a cross or a Chi-Rho in the sky and had a vision and heard the words, "In this sign you shall conquer," or "in this be victorious." He had the cross painted or the Chi-Rho painted on the shields of his troops and was victorious. It cannot be ruled out without Constantine's victory, the persecutions of Christians would have continued, and it is questionable whether Christianity would have continued to grow under these circumstances. It was also Constantine who convened the First Council of Nicaea to settle the Arian controversy. So the Arian controversy was basically, it was really a fight between Christians where they fought about the true nature of Jesus. Basically, the question was if Jesus is the Son of God, but he's also God, how can this be? Has Jesus always existed, but then how can he have been conceived, and so on? And it was about the true substance of Jesus, whether he was really God, like God the Father is God, or if he was kind of like inferior to that, and some questions like this. So it was a really complex topic, so I won't dive into all the theological depths of that discussion right now, but I just want to say it was a pretty hard-fought battle. It was not just the Christians discussing with each other. They even faked a murder and said the other people who, the Arians, I think, faked the murder and told the other ones were behind it, and so on. So it was really hard-fought battle, and Constantine wanted to clear the battle up. He wanted to get a resolution. He seems to not be that much in favor of what kind of resolution, or whether this would be a theological correct resolution. That was kind of not a concept he had. He was used to Roman religion that worked differently, but he wanted to have it settled. Therefore he convened in this first council of Nicaea. And what is interesting about this, at this council, the Nicene Creed that is used across denominations today and is the clearest definition of our faith was created, and it was they unified on this creed. And even today, I think, even with all the different churches and denominations that we have, we still can come together in this one creed, which is pretty amazing, pretty amazing what was achieved there. And therefore, this is also not to be put under the rug. So the separation between church and state is a hard-won achievement. At that time, however, there was no awareness of this, and so Christianity as the straight church was a better alternative than the pagan religion that persecuted Christianity with utmost severity. It was only from this constellation that a realization of the necessity of separating church and state could arise, which was then also accompanied by tragic elements. The reason why it was considered necessary to have a state religion is that religion provides an accepted standard for what is true. If state and church are separated, and the standard for what is considered to be true is also abolished, which can lead to a great deal of confusion. This is one of the results of the Reformation movement. In addition to the numerous insights into faith gained by questioning certain unbiblical premises, this questioning of everything also gave rise to the Enlightenment, which resulted in materialism and atheism. So one may now ask how this tragic nature of the world came about. From a Christian perspective, the answer can be found in the fall. Because the world is under the power of sin, every decision has such a tragic component. This is reinforced by the very nature of sin, which punishes not only those who commit it, but often also those who have nothing to do with the sin committed. Jesus points this out when the disciples, upon encountering a man blind from birth, asked him who sinned in this case, causing him to be afflicted with this disability. This is in John 9, 1 verse 3, where it says, "As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned,' said Jesus, 'but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him.'" Jesus affirms that neither he nor his parents have sinned. He thus explains the condition with the tragic overall state of the world, and immediately names the role God plays in it. His works are to be revealed in this tragic world. In doing so, Jesus sets a good example and heals the blind man by forming a paste from his saliva and the earth and applying it to the blind man's eyes. He instructs the blind man to wash himself in a pool called Sent One, and the blind man is healed. This is probably one of the most peculiar miracles of Jesus that has been recorded. It is quite obviously a symbolic act. Jesus takes that which is subject to tragic nature and brings it into contact with himself. So he brings the earth into, or the earth into contact with his saliva. In this way, it becomes the substance, so this paste, that takes away the tragedy, so this disability that the blind man had. Jesus' life is an embodiment of this process. God, who is righteous and without sin, comes into a world infected by sin and injustice. Instead of receiving him with open arms, the tragic sinful state of the world leads it to condemn and execute him. But it is precisely this apparent tragedy that God uses to achieve victory over sin and death. When I was first confronted with the statement that tragedies affect people more deeply than comedies, I knew immediately that it was true, but I wondered why. After all, anyone who has internalized the gospel would expect that a joyful message would have a deeper impact. That is true, but it depends on your perspective. I had the impression that he was saying, that God was saying, I transform all tragedies into comedies. From a human perspective, Jesus' condemnation and death on the cross was an absolute tragedy. However, from God's perspective and in view of his resurrection, it was a success story, and in the sense of a happy ending and the absolute exposure of the enemy, a comedy. In one podcast episode I did, still on the Sci-Faith podcast, it was called a Transformation to Rest. And in this I discussed the interesting property of theoretical physics, that it is always possible to view the problems of physics from a perspective in which they are already solved. In physics, it is usually more difficult to find this transformation than to solve the problem, but it illustrates precisely this point. From God's perspective, the problems are already solved. As Christians, we can know that although we are not automatically spared from tragic events, since we still live in this sinful world, God will, as with the paste that healed the blind man, take away the tragedy. This may be a literal removal of the tragedy as with the blind man, or he may transform it to give us his perspective in which it appears in his light. It is important to understand that this does not mean that everything will always feel and appear to be hunky-dory on the outside. After Jesus' death on the cross, his disciples were in mourning. We often read this knowing what happens next, but the disciples were not aware of this, even though Jesus told them very clearly several times, but they did not understand. For them in those hours, everything was over. The man they had staked everything on had, to all appearances, failed. What's more, their greatest teacher and friend had died. Later in the early years of Christianity, the church had to endure many tragic experiences with the deaths of numerous martyrs, and did not immediately see how all this could turn out for the good. It may be the same for us, that we have to go through tragic experiences whose meaning we will only understand later or even only in heaven. In such moments, we need more than ever the faith that he can and will turn every tragic situation into a joyful one. The cross, as the ultimate tragedy that was transformed into good news, serves as an eternal proof of this. Thank you for listening to the Follow the Lamb podcast. Now it's your turn. Please let me know what you think about this episode. If you are on Spotify, you can use the comment section below. Otherwise, you can go over to my Substack, youfollowthelamb.substack.com, and there you find all the podcast episodes as articles, and you can read them again if you like, and also comment on them. If you want to contact me directly, feel free to use the contact form at my webpage sci-faith.de/en/contact. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means it is only produced and marketed by me, and therefore I need your support. Share it with your friends, relatives, and everyone you think might be interested in hearing these episodes. Also, do not forget to give this podcast a 5-star rating and subscribe to it to never miss an episode. Thank you very much, and follow the lamp.